Imagine a person who was simultaneously a saint and a heretic. A brilliant military leader who did not win a single major battle single-handedly. A simple peasant girl who understood court etiquette better than some aristocrats. This was Joan of Arc, one of the most controversial and famous figures in history. Who was she really? A fraud, a madwoman, or a genuine saint? To understand this, one must first see the world into which she was born. And that world was on the verge of collapse. The year was 1412, and the 100 Years' War between England and France had been raging for nearly 75 years. This was not merely a dispute between kings, it was a question of the very existence of France as a state. By that time, the English felt like masters over most of French territory. The treasury was empty, the army demoralized, and the legitimate heir to the throne, the Dauphin Charles, was seriously considering fleeing the country. It was in this seemingly hopeless situation, in the village of Domremy, that a girl named Joan was born into a family of prosperous peasants. And immediately we encounter the first myths. Later, astonished by her manners, courtiers would spread rumors that Joan was the illegitimate daughter of a duke. But this is not true.
Her father was a respected man who owned land and had a stable income. Her good manners were a result of being raised in a prosperous family that valued traditions. Another myth portrays her alternately as a rebel or a meek lamb. In reality, as is often the case, the truth is simpler. Witnesses at her posthumous rehabilitation trial described Joan as a quiet, pious child. Her most serious transgression was secretly sneaking into restricted areas of the church to pray for longer periods. Everything changed when Joan was around 13 years old. She began to hear voices and see visions. Some see this as a divine miracle, while others attribute it to symptoms of illness, a tumor, epilepsy, or schizophrenia. Contemporary documents, including those from hostile English sources, record no signs of cognitive impairment or mood swings in her. She was always of sound mind. Scientists have put forward an interesting theory. The cause could have been illnesses common at the time, such as bovine tuberculosis. These could have caused hallucinations, but did not deprive a person of their reason. And can one convince oneself to have a vision? Absolutely. Recall how sometimes you want something so badly that your brain itself conjures up a dozen ironclad reasons.
Joan lived in a world of profound faith, and her inner conviction could have taken such a form. At 16, these voices commanded her to save France. With this seemingly insane idea, she went to the captain of the local garrison, Robert de Baudricourt. She declared that the Archangel Michael had charged her with lifting the siege of Orléans and placing the Dauphin Charles on the throne. The captain, quite logically, sent her away. But Joan was persistent. She returned a year later and astonished everyone by accurately predicting the defeat of the French forces in the so-called Battle of the Herrings. This was now a serious matter. De Baudricourt finally provided her with an escort and sent her to the Dauphin's court. Now, let's pause on an important question. Could women in the dark Middle Ages really just show up and lead an army? It turns out the surprise was not so universal. French history knew examples of powerful women, like Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine. There were also proto-feminist figures of that era, such as the writer Christine de Pizan, who debated women's role in society. So while Joan's appearance was extraordinary, it was not entirely inconceivable. What surprised Captain de Baudricourt was less her gender, and more her youth and incredible self-confidence.
She was not given command of troops immediately. It was simply that, in a situation of utter desperation, a miracle was the last hope, and Joan became its embodiment. What do you think? Can her visions be explained solely by illness, or does this story truly have room for a miracle? Share your opinion in the comments. And so Joan found herself beneath the walls of Orléans. The city was the last bastion blocking the English path to southern France. Its fall would have meant the end. Liberating it was considered impossible. The best generals could only throw up their hands in despair. Yet in just 4 days, Joan performed a miracle. What was her secret? There was no magic. She simply proved to be a voice of reason within an army plagued by questionable tactical decisions. If you examine the chronicles of the war's battles, you will be surprised. The French consistently lost despite having numerical superiority. At times, they sent heavy cavalry into volleys of arrows or chained their ships together, robbing them of maneuverability. Joan put an end to this madness. Her primary weapon was not a sword, but an incredible gift for persuasion. Soldiers who learned of the divine envoy regained their faith. Experienced commanders who had felt betrayed by the king returned to the fight. Most importantly, Joan managed to countermand the most ill-conceived orders from the generals.
She was not a brilliant strategist, but she possessed what the French army lacked: common sense and an iron will. This victory made her a national heroine. After Orléans, the path to Reims, where French monarchs were traditionally crowned, lay practically open for the Dauphin Charles. The English retreated in panic. The coronation of Charles VII became Joan's triumph. She stood beside him in her armor, holding her banner. It seemed that one more push was needed to expel the enemy entirely. But then came the moment when military fortune turned against her. Joan insisted on an immediate march on Paris. However, the element of surprise was lost. The attack on the capital failed, and Joan was wounded. This single failure was enough for courtiers, envious of her fame, to begin whispering, "Has God turned away from her?" She was relieved of command. The belief in the miracle proved fragile. Unwilling to accept inactivity, Joan set out with a small band of volunteers to relieve the besieged city of Compiègne. This was a fateful error. The enemy was prepared for her trademark sudden assault. Caught in a trap while covering the retreat of her men, Joan was captured by the Burgundians, allies of the English. And then came the most bitter betrayal.
King Charles VII, to whom she had given the crown, did nothing to ransom or rescue her. He simply abandoned her. The irony of fate was bitter. The English purchased Joan from the Burgundians for a vast sum, 10,000 livres. But simply executing her was not enough for them. They needed to destroy her spiritually, to discredit her image as a divine envoy. For this, they staged a show trial, accusing her of heresy. But even here, Joan demonstrated incredible fortitude. She deftly parried the judges' tricky questions, avoiding their verbal traps. Neither the dreadful conditions of her imprisonment nor the constant psychological pressure broke her. What broke her was a deceitful trick. She was deceived into signing a document renouncing her errors, which, as she was illiterate, she could not read. Later, she disavowed this confession, but by then it no longer mattered. On May 30th, 1431, she was burned at the stake in Rouen. She was just 19 years old. But the story did not end there. After the war ended and political passions subsided, Charles VII, perhaps troubled by his conscience, initiated a new trial. In 1456, the first trial was declared null and void, and the charges were recognized as fabricated.
Joan of Arc's good name was restored. Then, in 1920, the very Catholic Church that had executed her canonized her as a saint. So who was she? Joan was not a professional military commander and did not win the war single-handedly, but she achieved the most crucial thing. She became the spark that ignited hope in the hearts of a desperate people. She gave France what is essential to win a war: faith in victory. Her image, over time, became a symbol not only of French resistance, but also of incredible strength of spirit, inspiring millions to this day. What do you think? How can a single individual change the course of history without being a king or a general? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you found Joan of Arc's story compelling, please support our channel with a like. It really helps us grow. And subscribe so you don't miss our future stories about the most remarkable people and events of the past. Until next time.